I'm here to introduce Marie Olson, Kaistan, and at.oow Vivian Martindale, doing the Indigenous cultural and intellectual property rights. Thank you. That's all I'm here to do. Thanks.
Morning, everybody. I planned for like 10 people because we stayed at the tribal house till 1 o'clock in the morning, so. And then we all had to talk, all my guests, Clarissa and Georgia and everybody, till about 2 o'clock in the morning, so we're pretty tired. But anyway, I wanted to ask, does anybody have a birthday today? Does anyone here in the audience have a birthday today? How about last week? How about the week before? How about this month? Okay, I saw a hand go up there at the computer. Was it your birthday? What's your name? Kai? Okay, Kai's birthday was at the beginning of this month. Anybody else who had a birthday this year or last year? We're gonna celebrate here. This is a celebratory thing because we survived the last however many days of this conference. Yes, so we're passing out cupcakes. If there isn't enough, you could probably have enough for a bite with your neighbor. So if you know your neighbor, you can each take a little nibble there. Well, the reason I did something fun first is because this, as you can see, this is a mouthful. I can't say it 3 times fast. Indigenous cultural and intellectual property rights. And usually when I say I'm going to talk about that, people say, huh? So, Marie Olson teaches a course through the University of Alaska Fairbanks, a graduate course, 600 level, on this particular subject. And I was her student teacher last year, and I was also her student a couple years before that. It's in the Masters of Cross-Cultural Studies program from Fairbanks. And so Marie is more the expert than I am. Are you guys ready to party? Okay, we're going to sing happy birthday to Kai, but you can sing happy birthday to anybody you want to. So are you guys ready? Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday dear Kai, happy birthday to you. You can sing it, clink it, come on.
Well, I have the world's worst voice.
That's okay.
Kai. Siguwu yagayi, siguwu yagayi, siguwu siguyi, siguwu yagayi.
Yates, did you want to light those, or are we going to start a fire? Well, if you want to light it, you guys can light it, but... Oh yeah, we got to give it back to the cameraman. Okay, what I wanted to do is point out, you guys have all broken the law right now. Okay, you're all criminals. So if the copyright police was here, you'd be in trouble. Big brother. In 1998, the copyright extension affected the Happy Birthday song. Given the formal logic of the copyright, singing the songs to one child infringes the copyrights of the composer and the lyricist. But fair use permits private performance of copyrighted music, largely because enforcement of the law in these situations, obviously this one, would be intrusive and impractical, because I don't think we'd fit in the Sitka jail. This principle has been put to test in cases involving photocopying for personal use. In each case, the Supreme Court narrowly supports private reproduction over copyright owner's claim. The Happy Birthday song is under copyright until 2019. So just know that when your birthday comes, you can be sneaky. So go ahead. Now I had to put a disclaimer up because Marie and I aren't lawyers, so this isn't legal advice. You probably just should stay up there, Georgia, because that's... Just keep pressing until this slide is... I had to make this one a little special. Marie's adjunct professor at University of Alaska Fairbanks Center for Cross-Cultural Studies. And I'm a student. Okay. Now the first thing you're probably wondering is what is cultural and intellectual property rights? It's, I've kind of categorized it very briefly as, you know, European ancestry. I love to categorize things and break it down. So, intellectual property is a legal entitlement that attaches to an expression formed of an idea or some other intangible matter. Intangible is ideas, creations of the human mind, and cultural property obviously is tangible things, objects, collections, specimens, structures, sites identified as having artistic, historic, scientific, or religious or social significance. And so I guess that's pretty much a given. And the presentation we're going to do is going to cover copyrights, patents, trademarks, and trade secrets. And then I'm going to discuss the differences, because this is important, between Western and Indigenous worldview. So, and if you see the little party guy up there, that's when I'm kind of like doing the Johnny Carson thing where he you know, Kreskin. But I have all these weird facts, so anyway. I'll read one of them now before I read the copyrights. Bimbo Donuts. Not a product you'd want to give your female friends. Actually, Bimbo is a popular brand of baked goods from Mexico, and a good example of why it pays to consider foreign markets before choosing a trademark. U.S. companies can easily run into the same situation in reverse. Wendy's, and everybody knows Wendy's fast food, Biggie fries are popular in the USA, but in the UK, the trademark is a bit off-putting, because in British slang, Biggie is the reason for large disposable diapers. So if you're going to have a trademark, you got to consider, you know, are you going to go global, and what is your phrase? Well, we're going to talk about copyrights. You've probably all seen the little circle in the sea. And the social purpose of copyrights, as defined in the Constitution, is to promote the progress of science and useful arts. It's a form of protection given to original works of authorship, which includes literary, dramatic, musical, artistic, and other intellectual works. And a copyright gives the owner a right to reproduce the work, to prepare derivative works based upon the work, distribute copies or records of the work to the public by sale, rent, lease, or lending. And to perform the work publicly and to display the work publicly. And as Indigenous peoples, you're probably going to run into, I know these kind of seem like big terms, but Clarissa was just telling me that somebody told her they just published, a woman published a book of poems and used her photographs, is it? Her artwork images from her website into the poetry book. And of course she credits Clarissa, but there was no permission given. That is a huge violation of copyright laws. But that's the risk that Clarissa runs, putting things on the internet. So you got to realize the internet, even though I have a little bit on it, it underlies, it's a huge can of worms, just very big. So, and one of the things to discuss is the Swanton's Tlingit books texts. That is on sacredtext.com. It's in the public domain, which means the copyright has expired. And so we're at risk, even though you could say, well, that's my clan story, that is up there. And anyone, could take, for example, some of our stories are not children's stories, but someone may look at it and say, oh, that's a great, cute story, about the glacier overcoming the woman, the sacred Kiks.adi story. That story is at risk right now of being produced into a children's book by a non-native author or someone in another country. There's lots and lots of stories out there. So we're going to discuss a little bit of how to try and protect those things. But okay, go ahead. And who can claim a copyright? A copyright exists from the time the work is created in a fixed form, and it immediately becomes the property of the author. The works made for hire, the employer and not the employee is considered to be the author, and works commissioned is considered for hire. For example, Dick and Nora's books from Alaska. Alaska, I believe, holds the copyright, so they get the money. But that's, they took on that project, and, they probably had to sign a paper, I guess. And so you need to think about that if you're going to work for your tribe and you're going to collect stories or you're going to do something like that, you have to know as an author that, you don't have any rights to that stuff. Your tribe might, or the group that you're working for could be the National Park Service you're collecting information from, the state, Fish and Game, things like that. And so, but if you're working for yourself, that's a different story. So just know when you go into those collaborative works that you should know who's going to hold the copyright. Okay? Oh. General copyright principles. Ownership of a book. I think you got to go back, Georgia. Ownership of a book, manuscript, painting, or any other copy, phono record does not give the possessor the copyright. The transfer of ownership of the protected material does not of itself convey any copyright. So these are actually from the Copyright Office, the U.S. Copyright and Patent Office. And you can actually go to their websites, and they're pretty clear. And in fact, there's a table with some free stuff there. The Indian Arts and Crafts Board sent me about 24 copies of their packets for artists, and it includes something about the copyright and trademarks in there. So, and minors may claim copyrights, but I think there is some little bit of rules under that. What works are protected under a copyright? Fixed tangible works such as literary, music, dramatic, including accompanying music, pantomimes, choreographic works. Go ahead. Pictorial, graphic, sculptural works, motion pictures, audio visuals, sound recordings, and I think architectural has recently been added. And the U.S. Copyright Office suggests the categories be viewed broadly. And how do you secure a copyright? No publication or registration or other action is required to secure a copyright. It's secured automatically when the work is created or fixed. And you used to, back in the 70s, have to write your little C in the circle after your name, like if you wrote a poem or something, and now you don't even have to do that. So it's just understood as yours. The use of the copyright symbol is important because it informs the public that a certain work is protected. So even though you don't need it, like Clarissa has her website with her stories on it, it's good to have that circle and copyright, and she probably has that on her website anyway. And it's usually followed by the year of the first publication and the name of the copyright owner. And how long does the copyright protection last? The new law is very complicated. I just simplified it because it kind of contains works that are published in this date, and it's pages of information I really couldn't put up here. It's actually the new copyright laws. It is called the Sonny Bono copyright law. It's interesting. I guess he must have submitted it for law. Works created after January 1st, 1978 is automatically protected from the moment of creation, enduring through the life of the author, plus an additional 70 years after the author's death. Works by two or more authors, protection for 70 years after the last surviving author's death. So what you need to know is that about every 20 years, the copyright laws extend 20 years. So we've gone from 14 years in our history to up to 70 right now. Works for hire and anonymous and pseudonyms. The duration of the copyright is 95 years from publication or 120 years from creation, whichever is shorter. Works created before January 1st, 1978 are automatically brought under the current copyright protection. Okay, this is a trademark, so let me see if I can find a trademark one. Well, maybe not. I have a lot of really cool patent ones here. Well, let's just, okay. In 1983, Johnny Carson, whose long-running late-night comedy show had traditionally begun with the phrase, "Here's Johnny," successfully invoked the copyright protection law to prevent the sale of a "Here's Johnny" portable toilets. And I could see why he'd be upset, you know, because pretty soon they'd probably put his face, or he'd flip the lid and there he'd be, you know, with his Kreskin hat on. Okay, you have here some trademarks. I put some familiar ones. Coca-Cola, McDonald's. This is the Cleveland Indians, which is usually highly offensive, but I put it up there for a reason we're going to talk about. A trademark is a word, phrase, symbol, or design, a combination of words, phrases, that identify and distinguishes the source of the goods of one party from those of another. A service mark is the same as a trademark, except that it identifies the source rather than the product. So one thing you have to remember that it could be Georgia? Yeah. Usually she's really slow. She's a turtle from the Anahuac tribe on the East Coast. So when everyone tells you that all the native peoples on the East Coast are dead and long gone, there's one right there. So anyway, one of the things is phrases, symbols, and some of the stuff, you know, we run into today is if anyone trademarks Áak'w Khwáan as a war cry for their basketball team, you know, and legally, because they could legally trademark that, no one could use it legally anymore. So, you know, it could be, you know, a good thing we're not in the city where the big teams could steal that from us. So phrases can be copyrighted. Anyway, trademarked. Go ahead. Is a registration of a trademark required? Well, the trademark office says no, you can establish rights in a mark based upon the use of the mark. However, federal registration on the principal register gives specific advantages. And some of the advantages to registering your trademark is a notice to the public of the claim of the ownership of that trademark, and a legal presumption of the ownership of the mark, exclusive right to use the mark nationwide, and the ability to bring an action in court if somebody violates that trademark because you have it registered. And it also is a basis to obtain registration in foreign countries. So if you're going to register it, if you're going to use your internet trademark, it's probably best to register it. And the ability to file the U.S. registration with the U.S. Customs Service to prevent importation of infringing foreign goods. I recently received a Rolex watch for Christmas, and anybody want to buy it? Came from Kuwait, so I'm thinking it's probably not real. So it has a Rolex trademark on it and all that stuff. But it's really, you know, people get really good at imitating things nowadays. You know, we have, you know, Northwest Coast art that's really, you know, manufactured, things like that. So, and a lot of people take Northwest Coast art and put it as their trademark. So it's another thing to be careful. If you're going to design something, put it on the internet. You know, someone could take that Northwest Coast design and make it their trademark. You know, you could see Alaska Airlines with a Tlingit eagle on the tail, and not much you can do about it if they're going to trademark it. So, now I put the Washington Redskins logo up here because a lot of the trademarks for Native peoples are considered offensive, and we got a lot of teams there, and there's been some court actions taken. Go ahead. Here's the famous Crazy Horse malt liquor case. Crazy Horse was an Oglala Sioux warrior who led the defeat of Custer at the Battle of Bighorn. Let me see if I can find this information. Okay. In advertising, Chief Crazy Horse appears on cans of malt liquor. A red man lends his heritage to the packs of chewing tobacco, and a Native American princess sells cartons of butter, which you probably can look at. I think it's Land O'Lakes butter anyway. Even the Department of Agriculture, Soil and Water Conservation Society uses the image of Native Americans on its posters. Likewise, we have Jeep Cherokee, Apache helicopter are freely used in society, where one would, and you have to think about, one would never be using a Jeep African, Jeep Mexican, Oriental helicopter, or Jew helicopter. So you have to think about this from a Native American perspective, is when you see these, and if you get a little bit upset, you have a right to be upset, because some of the ethnic terms we don't use for other people, but we can freely use the word, Indian and Cherokee, and, someone could come up with Tlingit beer, and, highly offensive. So you have to really watch. And they brought suit against this company, I believe it was Stroh's, and they settled, and the company went to the reservation and paid. They paid for this. They apologized, and they took it, I believe, off the market. But I think there's something going on. Another company has bought it, and they continue to market it somewhere else, and the tribe hasn't brought suit against them. But the man who owned the company did realize it was offensive and took it off. But it was a long battle. Go ahead. So I talked about this. Here's some of the very famous stuff. The Chrysler Corporation has a Jeep Cherokee. Oneida, you probably have dishes in your cupboard. Mohawk carpets. And this is the Mohawk carpet. Tommy, who was Walt Disney Studios, designed him. And he's one of the most identifiable and effective company mascots in the history of American business. And this was an opinion that I got, actually I probably stole someone's idea off the internet. The infantile nature diminishes or trivializes real Indians. Columbus thought the people he met were children, meaning they were incapable of having mature thoughts, beliefs, or cultures. And so that's kind of this is saying this opinion is what's promoted by little Tommy there. Kids are seeing this. And, I don't know how popular Mohawk carpets is on the West Coast, but it's definitely East Coast stuff. So, and you've probably seen commercials. I don't know if he's on commercials or not. Okay, we're going to talk about patents. Patent is an invention. It's a grant of a property right to the inventor issued by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. It's 20 years from the date of application. Patent right includes the right to exclude others from asking, using, offering for sale, selling the invention in the U.S., or importing the invention in or out of the U.S. Go ahead. There's 3 types of patents. A utility patent, which is granted to anyone who invents or discovers any new and useful process, machine, article of manufacture, compositions of matter, or useful improvement. And a design patent granted to anyone who invents a new, original, and ornamental design for an article of manufacture. And a plant patent granted to anyone who invents or discovers a sexually reproduces any distinct or new variety of plant. And I think the plant patents are fairly recent. Let me see if I can find something on the plant patents. Anyway, of the 119 drugs with known chemical structures that are still extracted from higher plants and used in industrial countries, over 74% were discovered by chemists attempting to identify the chemical substances in plants used in traditional medicine. So that's one of the things that intellectual property, if you think about that, is plants. We have Devil's Club here in Southeast Alaska. Right now we have, I don't know any patents, but I think Marie has a little bit of a story on some company from outside came into Juneau and wanted to start harvesting, and I believe the people got together and stopped them from doing that. But we have in Kiks.adi, I didn't bring the samples, but there's one woman, Pauline Duncan, who makes the Devil's Club salve. And then I think I looked on the internet, there's a woman from Anchorage who has a farm. She's non-native. Then I think there's a couple of local, probably non-native people who are making these Devil's Club salve products, things like that. So that one is really at risk now as far as community, issues, local issues of, the information. And it's not that we don't want to share, and help people with curing diseases and things like that, but, mass production and exploitation by the big companies is really what you want to protect. Okay. Okay, this I just had to put up rather than a card so you could see this weird patent. Troy Hertubis patents a suit of armor that can withstand the attack of a grizzly bear. This is the Ursus Mark 6 bear-proof suit. 147 pounds of titanium alloy, rubber, plastic, and chain mail standing 7 feet tall. So you can imagine. And I'm thinking, he should go up to the Hoona dump and dump my garbage. Really. Go ahead. So far, the suit has endured a 12-gauge shotgun blast to the chest, falling 150 feet off a cliff at Niagara Falls and at 18 times in the path of a 3-ton truck traveling 30 miles per hour. So I'm assuming this guy stood in there unless he got his brother to stand there, give him, And the inventor tried the suit out at a local garbage dump frequented by black bears, but the bears ran away. He has yet to test it with brown bears. So I guess the bears were scared, so it did work. But that's why I said he needs to come to Hoona and see those huge bears that walk beside my house every day. And a trade secret. And this I added a little bit, and I'm not too sure exactly about trade secrets, but basically, the sauce on McDonald's Big Macs is probably a trade secret. Or maybe what goes in Pauline Duncan's salve might be a little different. And a trade secret it's a valuable business information that's not generally known. It's subject to reasonable efforts to preserve confidentiality. Generally speaking, a trade secret will be protected from exploitation by those who either obtain access through improper means, those who obtain information from one who they know or should have known, gained access through improper means, or those who breach a promise to keep the information confidential. Trade secrets are protected only under state law, and I'm not sure, I didn't look up Alaska's. The Uniform Trade Secret Acts, in effect, in a number of states, defines trade secrets as information including a formula, pattern, compilation, program, device, method, technique, or process that derives independent economic value from not being generally known and not being readily ascertainable and is subject to reasonable efforts to maintain secrecy. So this information is at your U.S. Patent Trademark Office too. And examples of potential trade secrets are medicinal formulas, customer lists too. So, people buy this. Trade secrets are very marketable. Designs, instructional methods, manufacturing process, document tracking processes, formulas for producing products. And unlike other forms of intellectual property, such as patents, copyrights, and trademarks, trade secrecy is basically a do-it-yourself form of protection. So you don't tell anybody. That's basically what it is. That's how you protect it. You don't register with the government to secure your trade secret. You simply keep the information confidential. Trade secret protection lasts for as long as the secret is kept confidential. Once a trade secret is made available to the public, it ends. And I thought, well, what's the point of having it then? 6 factors are generally used to determine whether a material is a trade secret. The extent to which information is known outside the business. So someone could say, well, that's not a secret. We all know that. The extent to which information is known by the employees and the measures taken by the company or person to guard that secret. Keep it in a vault, your Big Mac sauce. The value of information to the claimant and the competitors, so I guess there it is, economics, the value. The amount of effort or money expended by the claimant in developing the information and the ease which information could be acquired by others. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit. Oh, there's my guy. Okay. In 1853, Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, this is 1853, brought suit against an unauthorized German translation of her book. But the federal court ruled a translation may, in loose phraseology, be called a transcript or a copy of her thoughts or conceptions, but in no correct sense can it be called a copy of her book. She lost. So that's interesting. Of course, the laws have changed, but that was in the 1800s. The intellectual property rights laws evolved to serve the changing need of the American economy. So this is one of the things that you got to keep in mind. All these laws are based upon money and economics. It was considered a derivative of the large manufacturing industries that fueled the development of the United States. In 1790, original Copyright Act established a term of 14 years, and the most recent one was extended in 1998, the Sonny Bono copyright law. Today's economic climate is based more on the value of companies' intellectual property than on the value of harder assets, such as inventory, plants, and equipment. The real growth today has been in computer, telecommunications, pharmaceutical, and other related industries. So you see the laws change to fit that kind of thing and that kind of thinking. And I want to talk a little bit about the concepts of how these laws change. It kind of changes as our society changes, or at least as our dominant society, I should say, changes. And people have theories that of personal property, of individualism, of collective mindsets. And one of them is a person deserves to own something that he or she has created through productive labor, which obviously that's something that we all share. You know, we work on a weaving or something, or make a basket, and it's kind of ours in a way, and even though we may think collectively, we still have some form of internal ownership of that. The equity theory today, most Americans view a notion that each person who contributes to a collective enterprise deserves equal commensurate depending on their contribution. Also government involvement. Until the mid-19th century, there was a prevalent notion that the government could and should advance the public interest by encouraging social valuable ventures, and this changes depending on probably the administration. Classic liberalism. By the late 19th century, attitude changed, and the notion that the public and private societies be distinct. And then there's a romantic conception of authorship. A high value is placed on the individual author, and I run into this, me being a poet and writer all the time. Okay, what constitutes cultural property? And cultural property is a really significant issue in cultural and intellectual property rights, because as we've been talking about repatriation and all these things, we have to deal with these issues. Folklore, stories and myths, traditional dress, traditional ecological knowledge, plant knowledge, animal knowledge, environmental knowledge. I kind of separated those, but they probably all could be one. But just so you know, even methods of hunting and fishing, and human remains, sacred sites, cultural knowledge, and I put at.oow as an example, and other ways of life and traditional art. All that stuff is cultural property. And why do we want to protect this? Well, one of the main things right now is, you probably heard this, globalization. Well, what is that? Well, technology has allowed us to be more connected, and commerce, industry, things are going global, and we're no longer, isolated, even though we think we are. The impact of tourism. There was just a recent tourism conference here in Sitka, right? Up to this one, and there was a few people talking about tourism, and this is one I want communities to think about seriously. Sitka has Sitka tribes involved in tourism. Hoonah just developed theirs the last couple years, but there already is an impact. So that's one that you really need to think about in protecting your IPR. I didn't bring it, but I believe I saw last year on Hoonah's the website for the tourism, somewhere in there. It's a Miami company, I think half and half, I'm not sure, but advertising the shaman's grave in Hoonah. If you know where it's at, well, I'm not going to tell you where it's at, but it was advertising, go visiting a shaman's grave. And this is my theory what happened. This woman last summer, I believe, went off the tour ship, went hiking up that big cliff and gonna go find the shaman's grave. Well, a rock came down and hit her in the head. She didn't go up there. She had to get 3 stitches. So I don't think it's supposed to be visited. So, and also the bears, they have a bear viewing area where there's 2 trails, and they take 15, 20, 30 tourists, down each trail. And sometimes they've only had one man with a rifle going back and forth to those. And this is the bears' domain. This is the bears' place. You have to think about, But Hoonah needs those jobs. They need the jobs. So, this is a great opportunity for people to be working and to have these jobs and to share their knowledge. But the main thing is, they have to be in control of it, not anybody else. So that's the thing to think about with impact of tourism. And also, someone goes and to the tribal house, they have a wonderful show. They perform there. Well, you have someone that's listening to that show and that wonderful story, and then they go home and they're jotting down this wonderful story they just learned on the cruise ship, and next thing you know, that writer has published a book on that particular story, and there's not much you can do to protect that if it's not already in a book. So, or someone could just tell that tourist the story, you know, on the bus or whatever, and they could, you know, turn it into a children's story or some novel. I did come across a bodice ripper. Do you know what that is? In romantic novels, it's one where the guy and the girl, and she's got the big bustier on the front cover. Well, I found one that's Tlingit about a Khwáan in Wrangell. Anyway, I have not since found that. So if anybody finds that book, please let me know, because Marie is part of honoring Alaska's Indigenous literature and finding books that are inappropriate. So I haven't found this book, but it's about, so it's putting the whole ceremony in this romance novel. Somebody did it, and I don't know if it was a person from Wrangell, but I don't think so. Somebody probably visiting, but I think they described the Khwáan, and I'm not sure what it was set in, but probably the past. But so that's a book to keep an eye out for. We have the internet, we have monopolies, misappropriation of cultural knowledge, and importantly, rarely are Indigenous peoples compensated for that. So that's why we protect it. And another thing, this is what Marie taught me, is to think about, okay, what is intellectual property rights? Why do we protect it? And who is seeking this knowledge? So that's one thing you have to be aware is, okay, who's going to come into my community and seek this knowledge? And of course, we have history of anthropologists and ethnologists, and often these are employed by government agencies, hobbyists, collectors, extractors, and here it is again, ecotourism. Just because it says eco or whatever, it doesn't mean it's good. So you have to really analyze what's going on in your community. Developers, journalists, photographers, film crews, university-based plant collection programs, pharmaceutical companies is a biggie, plant breeders, artists, authors, anyway, research organizations. So that's probably pharmaceuticals, but National Cancer Institute is a big one that's funded. And let's see, knowledge of plant, animal species. What are they seeking? Soils, mineral knowledge, plant preparation, knowledge of conservation, biological resources, sacred sites, handicrafts, artwork, performing arts, ancient sites, other cultural property. So everything in the community, just about everything of who you are, that's what's being sought. Traditional ceremonies, people want to view that. They want to buy traditional items. Natural resources for inventory. So be careful if someone just wants to inventory it. Well, inventory is going to go in some database and people will have that knowledge. So intellectual property issues involve not only copyright and everything, but culture, such as language, modes of thought, which are connected with language. A person's language is his intellectual property. I put that because that's kind of becoming evolved now as a protection of languages and things like that. So that's something to think about. And why are they seeking this? Well, I got the good old American dollar there. And also money, new knowledge, because a lot of universities are based upon, you know, whether you're going to publish, whether you're going to find new knowledge, something new. So people are always going into communities to find something new. Improve healthcare, increase crop productivity, industrial development, commercial, conservation of knowledge because of disappearing knowledge. So that's another one too. It's not all negative. And now I want to show you, this is where this comes into play, is the difference in how we view cultural and intellectual property rights between different cultures. The Indigenous worldview, people often don't view themselves as owners in a singular manner. A lot of it is knowledge that's in a communal or ownership or responsibility. Certain stories are owned by a particular clan, not necessarily. And a person may be a tradition bearer and allowed to stand up and say that story, but they won't be allowed to sell that story. The key term, I think, is responsibility. since it's often the responsibility of a person, medicine man, healer, tradition bearer, to keep that knowledge from the rest of the public. And often it's to keep the knowledge from anybody, except for when that person comes to ask, or if they're worthy of that knowledge too. And the responsibility within many of the communities is to keep the knowledge being passed down from generation to generation. And often, the knowledge isn't, how to prepare a certain type of tea or a salve isn't written down. It's passed down orally. And there's an intimate connection between the knowledge and the culture, so it's not separated. And the indigenous worldview of IPR includes writings, oral traditions, language, image as a people, which is where, of course, trademarks comes into play, and aspects of the culture that are inseparable with the spiritual and physical identity. Okay, let me read you something. In 1988, Bette Midler recovered $400,000 from Ford Motor Company on the grounds that they deliberately used in one of their advertisements a singer whose voice closely resembles Midler's. So I guess it can't be closely. So they obviously were using that to sell their cars. In the Western worldview, IPR means individual rights, or the rights of a corporation or university. It was first developed in a European and North American law as a mechanism to protect individual and industrial inventions. So not only that it's individual, it's industrial, these laws. So if you're wondering, well, gee, they don't fit with me as an artist or a writer or anything like that, it's because of that. In the Western worldview, the concept of ownership means that a person who owns something could legally and morally trade or sell or trade that item, which is some of the ways that I think, well, if I own something, it's mine and I can trade this or sell this. And in some people's worldview, that's not so. In Western laws, patents, trademarks are all designed to protect the individual, not the idea of community. Western society often assumes that things and ideas should be commercialized, and that's another important thing. And the dollar as the ending means. And I do this myself. I go up to artists or people who are carving or writing. You should sell that. You could make money. So, I perpetuate that too in my own worldview, is everything has to have the dollar as the bottom line, and that's not always so in people's minds. Patents are, here's the problems with Western CIPR laws. They're available in most countries, but they have limited terms of protection. They can be expensive, and they protect only the knowledge of individuals. So if you came here, to learn exactly how you can protect, well, basically, the current laws in the United States now will not protect a collective. It's the individual. So there's decisions to be made if you're an artist in a community and you want to protect your stuff, or you're a writer. How do you go about doing that, without, with these laws, and protect yourself? A copyright is easy to obtain and provides long-term protection, but the protection does expire at some point, which is contradictory to many oral traditions designed to be passed down indefinitely. Also, with a copyright, it must be in a physical form, and of course, most intellectual and cultural knowledge is passed down orally. Trademarks, a form of Western protection, is inexpensive, but it is a way of commercializing something which is contrary to indigenous concepts of culture. Therefore, trademarks do not protect indigenous knowledge. And a trademark is probably something that you could do, but like I say, that means that no one else can use that. So if you're going to trademark your specific eagle design, no one else may be able to use that. Trade secrets can only protect indigenous knowledge if that knowledge has a commercial application, but it can protect more knowledge than any other IPR types. And I came across this, and this was an opinion of a woman who had written a paper, but the downside to trade secrets is that only a few countries recognize this law. So basically, if you have something in your community, you just best keep it secret and control that knowledge from going out. And the problem is one size does not fit all. The Western IPR laws do not take into consideration a collective ownership. And I probably reiterated this over and over again. So, And these are, I actually had up here solutions, and Marie had suggested that there are no solutions. There's just suggestions. So I have some of the suggestions here for communities. To develop a reproduction rights organization such as the Sami people, which is where I come from. You can actually go look this up on the internet, but if you type in that, then you might get it in Finnish or Sami or Norwegian or Swedish, and I can't read any of those. So, develop trademarks, tribal trademarks, such as the statewide silver hand, and everybody's seen that. That's a really good idea. And also the key is control, not necessarily prevention. But to have a say-so in what of your art and stories and things like that are going out there. Develop a code of ethics or a code of cultural privacy, and establish a CIPR board or office. I'm recently working with Hoona Indian Association. I'm doing some research there, and they don't have anything set up right now to give me permission other than say, go ahead and go research. So I gave them my packet of my research proposal, things like that, and said, could you give me a letter? So I believe it's Mary Beth is developing that official form and letter for them, but not everybody, evidently. I assumed they had that, but they don't. So I believe See Alaska does. I think I have a copy of theirs. You can look it up on the internet too. So they do have something like that. Exercising tribal sovereignty, indigenous communities can be stewards of their own cultural and intellectual property. And I think that's probably the most important thing is, we might not be necessarily given tribal sovereignty in the context of the whole country, but we can surely try to exercise it by saying no and yes. And one of the good websites to go to is the Hopi website, and they have a lot of their offices, and they're very good at controlling that kind of stuff. Another one I thought was encourage artists to have collective protection groups. And obviously one of the things with the silver hand is I believe you have to be 1/4 Native, and there's a lot of artists out here who identify themselves as tribally Tlingit or Haida Tsimshian who are less than that. So, yeah.
I was going to say, that's right, it's going to the Senate floor this week.
Yeah.
We did retool the silver hand
Mm-hmm.
to take out the blood quantum. I think we'll be going with enrollment numbers.
Okay.
Corporate participants, so.
That's good. And there's also, local communities could do that. Hoona could have their stamp of approval for Hoona artists. Sitka could have theirs. You don't have to just rely on the silver hand. You could have a collective, you could have a weaving one. Clarissa, Terry, all the weavers could get together and have their weaver stamp. All you have to do is advertise it, you trademark it, and then they know that this collective weavers group approves of each other as weavers, something like that. That's the thing to do. So that's why I want to put there. These are just some of the ideas that I came up with too, but educate each other. Get your offices going, educate the people in the community, get involved in heritage protection movements. The World Intellectual Property Organization gave me permission to print out all the stuff on their website, but that's over there. Yes?
On your exercising tribal sovereignty, does that also cover songs?
Yeah. And that's another thing. Songs would be in danger. So you got to think of all this knowledge that you have in your community. Establish groups such as HAIL, and that's what Marie's going to talk about after I'm done with this, honoring Alaska's Indigenous Literature. And I think as far as that's my area, you could press the little thingy there. And then, yeah, that one. Yeah. There you go. Now turn it off. That'll stop. That's good. Okay. Literature is my passion, and that's one of the things I think is really neat about what Marie does is HAIL. If you've not heard of them, she'll tell you about it. But it's honoring Alaska's Indigenous literature, and it's a protective a measure that these group of women around Alaska have taken. Yes?
I just have one quick question. I don't know if you can answer me. I was just wondering if you have any information relating to the taking of DNA from indigenous peoples, and that would fall under intellectual property.
Yeah, I do. There were some articles, and I didn't put that in there, but it's a whole huge issue is patenting people's DNA. Let me see. The degree of control of life patents grants their owners is a growing concern to scientists, human rights, and patient advocates, ethicists. More than 20% of human genes have already been patented, and most of those patents are owned by corporations. So that's one of the things to consider is this whole gene and DNA thing. In fact, I think there was a woman in England who decided she would get a jump on this, and so she had her DNA tested, and she applied to UK's patent office and said she wanted to patent, to protect her own DNA, and they denied her. So the judge ruled that you do not own your own DNA. So if that's in Europe, it's I don't know if it's soon to come here. So be prepared. Yes, Walter?
Thank you. I think it's very useful information. I'd like to cite an example that a lot of us are familiar with here. Bill Holmes is non-native, and he did fabulous work, wrote many books, and I had the pleasure of many of us natives. The thing that was unique about Bill is he could break down the art better than we can. How does that fit into the scope of this discussion? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He actually marketed a lot of books, and as natives, we bought him many of those books.
Well, maybe I could answer that, Walter, after Marie talks. Yeah? Okay. Well, he was talking about someone who's non-native who contributes a lot to the community and the culture. But I want to give Marie a chance to talk before we go into that subject, because this is very important, because she will talk about a little bit about that in her organization.
Kayistan yudu wasak tlingit qindach. Anchkatuut tachayahat. Chagna khat city. Kiks.adi yadi ayachat. Ach ish kaji khan yudu wasakan. Sheet katach. Du hidi awe tse hit. Du tla. Schaste jude wasagun. Áak'w Khwáan du ish Yakutat jude wasagun. Atleindach. Gundal chish ach ish has Kiks.adi. Gundal chish ach lit go has Kiks.adi. Kanach at.oow Yakutat. My name is Marie Olson. I come from Áak'w Bay. I'm Áak'w Khwáan, just like my mother and my grandmother, whose name I carry. Right then and there, you are hearing something that all the Tlingit understand, that our names are at.oow. Just not anyone can carry my Tlingit name. It's in my family. It's history. It goes down and it tells a story about where we came from. So I'm always glad to introduce myself on my mother's side. But when I introduce myself through my father, I am not only introducing my father, I am honoring my father's side, the Kiks.adi. And when I say that he comes from Shidka, I'm standing on my father's land right now. I don't know how many generations my father's mother's parents have been in this particular area, but it was my grandmother, Shkaste, who wrote the history of the war between the Russians and the Kiks.adi. I look forward to that being printed because that is history with a big C. I have to thank Vivian Martindale. She's no longer my student, although I recommend her highly. She's working for her PhD, and she's going to make it. How did the course come about? It really came about because of a group of women, and I was one of them. We called ourselves the Alaska Indigenous Literary Review Board. And that was a mouthful for some of the girls. We came from all over the state representing the whole state, from Barrow to Kiks.adi, Koyukon. We even drifted over into Canada because of the Gwich'in. Down the Aleutian chain, southeast Alaska, Tlingit. We couldn't find a Haida, no pun intended. We couldn't find a Haida that could read that could review some of the books, I'm sorry. But we had a Simpsian Utskan, and that was Arnold Booth. We were at a Native Educators Conference that dovetailed into the bilingual multicultural education equity convention. Now that's another big long acronym. I learned to speak in acronyms. I don't appreciate acronyms, but they certainly shorten a speech. The women looked at all kinds of textbooks and reviewed them, and we found some that we called bad, some that were derogatory, and most of the textbooks that we came across were full of omission. That's not new. I remember reviewing textbooks in California, and the textbook down there, I swear, weighed 6 pounds, but it was the history of the United States. And San Francisco is a very cosmopolitan city. And we had people from all walks of life. We had Filipinos, Japanese, Chinese, you name it, we had them all. We even had the Indians. They didn't think we were there. But I showed up, and Eskimo showed up, and then the Hopi and Zuni showed up. So the Indians were pretty well represented. And it was our duty to review the 6-pound history textbook for the state of California. And I panicked when I saw that big book. It was heavy, and I immediately relaxed when I found out all I had to do was to find the section in Alaska. That relaxed me until I got to reading the paragraph about Alaska. Believe me, it was a paragraph. It didn't mention any of the natives from Alaska except Eskimo. That's the big omission of all of us. It gave the impression to the students that were learning from this huge textbook that Alaska has only Eskimos. It didn't explain that there's the northern Inupiaq and the Yupik. It didn't even mention the Aleuts and the Aleutian chain. So what did I have to do when I went back to give my report? Nothing. There was nothing about me, nothing about the Athabascan, nothing about the Aleuts, nothing about the Inupiaq, Chupik, Yupik. It was a relief. I didn't have to do that much reading, but it was also disheartening because the entire United States, or all of California, is learning that there are nothing but Eskimos in the state of Alaska. That's how the beginning of this particular course. And I think we have books out here on the result of the study, ANKN. You'll find it there. We met every year beginning 2000 at the tail end or at the beginning of the Native Educators Conference. We didn't have any money, so we met when we could, and sometimes we met by email. And every once in a while, we fell into some money again, going in with the Alaska Rural Systemic Initiative. Whenever they met in Juneau, the Hale group met. And in Juneau was the place where our name changed from AILRB to HAIL. Hale. Now that makes a lot of sense. What Hale started to do was very interesting, and we have some recipients here. We had the opportunity to look for Native authors. We had the opportunity to recognize Native authors. And one is walking out of the door right now. We had oh, thank you. There was a celebration that was the brainchild of Andy Hope, who was on the committee. And I should recognize all the women that were there that were part of the Hale group. Ruth Demmert attended some of the meetings. Sophie Shields from Eskimo. Esther from Dillingham. Bernadette Albana Stimple from Nome, Terry Schneider from the Aleutian chain, Patty Atkinson, who was from down here but culturally Aleut, Eleanor Laughlin Athabaskan, Olga Pestrikov from the chain, Martha Stackhouse from Barrow, Dorothy Larson from Kodiak, Virginia Ned Koyukon Athabaskan, Andy Hope, myself, Moses Dirks from the Aleutian chain, Paul Ungtuguk, Edna Lanebull attended some of our meetings, Lolly Carpluk from Mountain Village, and our leader, Dr. Ray Barnhart. Dr. Ray Barnhart has the ability to recognize the potential of people and to tap them and put them to work. Amazing person. The Southeast recipients were Nora Dauenhauer for one of her books, Andy Hope for his Will the Time Ever Come, Jan Garcia for one of her books on the tides, Irma Lawrence as an elder, and myself. In the class, Vivian covered it up pretty well, but that was from the Western viewpoint. It really did not address how the indigenous people can handle it. And throughout most of the books, it was very discouraging, saying that there was not much we could do, but we were of the opinion that something can be done, and that's why I changed Vivian's solutions to suggestions. I used speakers from all over that spoke to the class. This was done by distance learning over the telephones, and they sent in their homework by internet, by email. I had John Nagiak from Anaktubic Pass speak to the class, Martha Stackhouse from Point Barrow, Dr. Gordon Puller from University of Alaska, Anchorage, and Dr. William Demmert, University of Washington, Dillingham, and Judge Jim Bowen, who was speaking here at one time yesterday, Virginia Ned, and Melody McCoy, an attorney for the Native American Rights Fund, Cecilia Martz, Chupik from a little bit outside of Bethel, and Dr. Sven Hawkinson from Kodiak, and Lolly Carpluk from Mountain Village, but she lives in Fairbanks, Esther Ilutzik from Dillingham, and Linda Smith, who I tapped and was fortunate to get her to speak at one time. She's a professor from New Zealand and carries a PhD. Now, those are all natives, all of them. I had one non-native, and I've never met him, but he was a lot of help, and that was Dr. Thomas Greaves, who edited one of the books. A source book. I recommend that book. But, boy, am I having trouble. I taught the class every spring semester. This spring semester, I'm not teaching it. I'm recommending this book the next time. Indigenous Intellectual property rights. This is a master's course. That is, you will have had 4 years of college or your 4-year degree. That rather limits the participation of most natives that want to know, and that should know, and that should understand what intellectual property rights means to us now, because this entire conference today, the past few days, has been nothing but intellectual property in all categories. I wrote a list down. Every day I was taking notes about the different categories, and I'm just going to go through them real quick. I heard somebody talking about politics. We have them. We all have them. In the southeastern culture on the state of Alaska, there are our own native politics. And just the very term of this conference, sharing our knowledge, it doesn't frighten me, but it really worries me, because we ourselves are putting our knowledge out there in the public domain. We are doing it ourselves, and that scares me. It worries me. I heard metaphors. Our language, the Tlingit language, is full of beautiful metaphors. And to translate a metaphor in our language is rather difficult. We can say one word that will take 4 pages to explain just what we're getting at. And I heard that in this convention. Our language is our at.oow. It explains who we are. It's important when we stand up here that we introduce ourselves in our language in the proper manner. We just don't say, I'm Marie Olson and I teach this class, and then take off. I have to honor my parents, my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather who is from Lake Atlan, my father. I have to especially honor my father. So our language says a lot about us. Our music, you heard a lot about music, the songs, and the dancing last night was fantastic. I stayed long enough to watch the Yakutat dancers. They were giving you their history in their song and dance. I heard poetry. We do have a certain amount of poetry. Maybe ours aren't long. It might be a lot more like the Japanese haiku, which is very short, but full of metaphors that say something instead of the long poetry that you hear. So our Tlingit language lends itself to the Japanese haiku. We heard some history. How do we record our history? Our language for the longest time was not written. it was learned, it became part of your intellectual property. It was stored up there in a certain manner, and that's the way we learned it. The totem poles that you see are a recording of our history. My name records some history. A lot of our names today are losing the stories of their personal names. Something is happening there that is really bad, but that is a way of recording our history. Place names. Gathering place names is an exciting thing, and I'm glad it's happening. Angoon has a place names project. Cake has a place names project. Juneau has a place names project. Something that's finished. That's a way of recording our history. You heard Dath Ginny. She was telling a story in her newly acquired Tlingit language. And she said it's her first time telling stories in her language. She was very humble about it. Being humble is part of our culture. Not only being humble, but being respectful to the opposite side. We heard some beautiful Tlingit oratory, and that's part of our culture. Speaking in metaphors. Nora has a book out called Hashika that tells the people giving oratorical speeches. The women have a certain way of speaking, and the men have a certain manner of speaking. Ecology, I think the native people, not only in Alaska, but down south, because when I lived in the Bay Area, I was with and hobnobbing with Native Americans from all over the United States. We were preservationists, we were ecologists. We lived with our surroundings. We didn't use it. It was our way of living with the land around us. The natives down there often referred to Mother Earth. I believe that. And the sky as their father. And I believe that. Because we are naturalists and ecologists. Our myths have been compiled in books. There's a bad one up here. Thank you. That's what happens to our stories. Somebody takes them and puts them in a book, and they don't give recognition. They don't give back anything. Myths and legends were taken without our permission from the very beginning when the Americans came, when the Spanish came, when the French came, and things got steadily worse when the United States bought Alaska. The United States record in the state of Alaska is a disgrace because they took away our rights. They tried to take away our language. They tried to assimilate us into their culture. They tried to westernize us. And they almost succeeded. I am glad to say that there is one anthropologist that I know of that recognizes that maybe, yes, there is something to our myths. Maybe there is something to our legends. And that was Tiger Birch. I happened to sit at a table with him, and I read one of his big books, and he was talking about that. There is something to our, what we tell them, and it would be history to us, but it was myths and legends to them. And to give you a short story of his example, Gwich'in, Athabaskan are right on the Canadian border and the Alaska. The people there had been around the west coast, around Kotzebue, visiting, and a couple of their fellows were dispatched in no uncertain terms. They were killed. And when the Gwich'in found out about it from the border, they walked. They walked from the border of Canada and Alaska towards Kotzebue, and they got even. The people that collected that story called it a legend. But Tiger Birch was looking at it in a different light. He was looking at it as they could have. They could have done that. In those days, there were no cars, no planes, nothing. They had dog sleds. And what did they do? They walked the entire, right across Alaska. Yeah, we used to do that. You heard the story of Strongman. There's a coloring book here about by Ishmael Hope. That's an amazing book that tells the story of Strongman, or the Dude, and how we kept our physical selves strong. The boys learned from a very early age what it was to become a man, how to become a responsible person, how to become a leader. That's what that legend is talking about. That's what that myth is talking about. It was really a way that we raised our and trained our young men. To me, it's not a myth or a legend. It's our way of raising our children. Communications, we had a lot of communications, and you have to think about this. It has given me a lot of thought, because I used to hear, as I was growing up, that we had some powerful shaman that could communicate. And my older brother used to chuckle about it. He said, yeah, we had the telephone long before it came about. Mental telepathy. The shaman were able to speak from Hoona to Haines without using the telephone. They spoke to each other. That was some kind of communications. When when two people or three people get together and they get into an argument because they misunderstood each other. Well, communications to the Tlingit people was very easy the way our language is constructed. As I said earlier, one word could take 3 or 4 pages to be translated. Go. Nora says yes. I have to include spirituality. There are some people that are going back to our way of recognizing a supreme being. In our culture, we have one God, a God that we never see, and we thank that God every day for the day. And you heard a lot of spirituality. You've seen a lot of spirituality in this convention. Memorials, we recognize our people, and I think there were some accidents or deaths while we were here. The Yakutat people had to go to the airport to meet somebody. Our death, to translate it into English, is when somebody walks into the forest. We have another word for it, nana, but I like that term, when somebody has walked into the forest. Our laws are natural. I heard someone speak about indigenous theory. I think that was Kenny Grant that said that. I like that, indigenous theory. And then I heard somebody say something about linguistic artifacts. That's my my good friend Harold Jacobs. He's my brother. We have Tlingit law. It's been recorded and written and written and written and written, but not quite studied because they don't understand it. You saw Western law here about patents, trademarks, and copyrights that do not pertain to any of our works because we operate on a community level. We're not individual in our ownership. We have community ownership. We have clan ownership. We have tribal ownership. Not one person can say that this design is mine. It belongs to the clan, to the tribe. So the Tlingit laws have been recorded, and it's just a matter for someone to start studying it and putting it all together and in a way codifying it. Someone has to do that. And I'm looking to some students that can do that. And we have a neat program at the University of Alaska Southeast that I've been involved in from almost the very beginning, putting indigenous teachers in Alaska schools, PITAs, and then later on they added administrators to that. It has already put teachers, indigenous teachers in the schools, and to me that's a successful program. I enjoy that program. It starts with the high school, that when the child is in the last year in high school, they're already going out to the university and getting acquainted with the university system. As a matter of fact, if they want to, they can earn a credit for doing such a thing. I have to conclude here, and I'll just remind you again that all of our things, as one of the younger presenters says, all of our stuff is out in the public domain. Indeed it is. But it's up to us to do something about it, because it's obvious Western law will not face it. They can't. It's up to us to change that. How do we do that? Well, good place to start is tribal college, 2-year college or 4-year college to address that. There are tribal colleges. We have 2 in Alaska, one Iliksapiq up in Barrow and one outside of Tanana. We are working on another one for Southeast Tribal College. But that isn't all we need, because with the advent of NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Repatriation Act, we're getting a lot of our artifacts back. Where are they going? They're going into other museums for safekeeping. They're there on loan. We need our own museums in every village. That means those people that are going to be working in those museums have to be trained. And where do they get it? Well, they're going to get it at our tribal college, of course. My former student covered the subject pretty well. She earned an A in the class. And it was a delight to have her. I can't say that her sense of humor is weird. I'll tell you, it's quick. Last night at the poetry reading, I was thinking maybe she is weird. That was absolutely comical. I don't think I've laughed so hard in my life. Now I'd like to see Tlingit haiku. That would be, because we will have, if you study metaphors, study our language and metaphors, we can make our Tlingit haiku. It's just 3 lines of poetry, but we have to know our language in order to do that. So, and I'm glad that our language is being taught at the university level. Tlingit was my first language. I can honestly say that I am no longer bilingual. I understand it. It's music to my ears. I heard Nora's mother speaking with her son, John Marks. I enjoyed it so much. I went over there and I told them in English, I enjoyed listening to you. And Johnny asked me in Tlingit, do you understand it? All I could say was Yakutat, just a little bit. Gunlas Chish.
Well, we actually had some workshop planned, but I think you guys probably need lunch and rest, and I'm kind of tired too. But what I wanted to show you is some of the books, and I have some little cards up here, so if you want to come and write down the titles. But and then there was some free stuff back there, but it might be already pretty much gone through. Oh, okay. But these books here Marie uses. This one here, Indigenous Intellectual Property Rights. So this goes really heavy into what I've been talking about. This one here, Beyond Intellectual Property. Protecting Indigenous Knowledge and Heritage. And there's a lot of them. There's ones on biodiversity. There's on NAGPRA ethics. And we have some books here that they had recommended for HAIL recipients. There's a lot of Native publishers or writers out there. I think the one example we have is David Katzek on the Shinnecock, the Salmon Boy story. Nora has books, so I encourage you to support your Native authors. And this one here received the HAIL Award last year. This one is Duffy's niece. Stand up, Duffy. Her niece wrote this, and it's a very good book. So I just encourage you when you pick up books is to just look inside and find out who wrote it. You know, look in your tourist shops, find out who's writing the books, who's writing about you. And encourage authors in your community, you know, how is this information going out? Who's publishing it? Who's getting the royalties? Things like that. And there's no reason why you can't be writing about yourselves, and encourage one another to do that and to write about yourselves. That's the only way to get the correct information out if you're worried about what information is going out. So writers groups is a good way. In fact, I'm going to Hoonah in April or May to actually start a writers group there and to educate people with HIA about how to start writers groups, how to find publications, and we'll cover things like intellectual property, who can write about what, things like that, how to pair people with writers, illustrators, things like that. So if anybody's interested in their community and starting something like that, just let me know. So thank you very much.